I think one of the challenges in leadership, and one of the biggest challenges, is to have the humility to question your own personal biases, to question your own thought processes, and to open yourself up to other people's perspectives. And so, what I would say is that I learned that curriculum wasn't the end in itself, it was a means to an end. And how do you create opportunities that are relevant to individuals that work with you? How do you, or students, and how do you do the same things that everyone wants? Everyone wants their kids to be successful. Everyone wants their kids to be decision makers, thinkers, critical thinking. So how do you put that in an authentic experience? So if I flip that to becoming a system leader, and let's say in an experience where there's not a lot of commonality between schools and there's a great care in all the schools, there's all these different things. There's schools using different assessments and different focus points, and there's different needs. The challenge becomes, how do you start to build that collaborative spirit with the people you're working with?
So today's guest, Mike Borgfjord, really fooled me. He fooled me in that I got a chance to spend a day with him and some of his team and some other school divisions in and around Edmonton and Alberta. And he fooled me in that I assumed Mike had been in Black Gold School Division for years. The way he interacted with people, his sort of level of comfort. Then I find out he's only been there since I believe March of this year. And yet, as you'll hear in this conversation, you understand why he is the way he is. The emphasis that he's put on not just building relationships, that is pretty common amongst all good leaders in education, especially Canadian educators. They all talk about that. They value that. But I think the intention to which he works to understand his community. And for those of you that know Canada, Alberta, there's not a million miles difference between school divisions. There's an ethos and a culture in Alberta, as in every province, that's quite similar. However, he's interested in the nuanced differences, and we explore that today. What is somewhat different about this specific school division, as somebody who's led and worked in a number of school divisions across Canada? But Mike pays attention to that. He's very focused on what is it that makes folks tick, and how is he going to insert his leadership in the way that's going to best serve them. And I really find that conversation fascinating. We talk a lot about some of the failures he's had with technology implementation and things he's learned along the way. Really thoughtful. It was just a nice surprise, if you will, as we unpacked some of those leadership ideas. And that's exactly what I hope this show is for people. We are now at this is 61. Just trucking along some great episodes and some good, really good ones to come. You'll be very excited in the next few weeks with some of the guests I have. But without any more yakking from me, let's listen to Mike. Mike, you definitely, I think, have the coolest division name in all of Canada, perhaps. So tell me about the name of your division and a little bit about it. I'll let you share the name.
Okay, our Black Gold School Division, and I think Leduc is famous for big oil discovery years past. And the region in Black Gold, one of the largest industrial areas in Western Canada. So lots of high-tech businesses, drilling companies, engineering, you name it, it's here. Black Gold School Division is a fantastic division that really it's a growing division, has City of Beaumont, City of Leduc, and then a number of rural communities, very tightly knit communities. And so got that rural feel with the urban parts to it. And it's a growing division. So continually growing, 13,500 students approximately at 32 schools. So it's a great place to be.
What's your history there? How long have you been involved in Black Gold?
I've been here for 7 months. Prior to that, I was just north of Edmonton in a division called Pembina Hill School Division. And I spent the majority of my career in Manitoba. I was a superintendent for almost 14 years, just outside the city of Winnipeg, and a vast varied experience. And so it's been great division to come to.
So when you take your sort of cumulative experiences in different provinces, different school districts, and being 7 months into this one, how do you bring those experiences with you, and how does that inform the way in which you're going to lead a division that's in some ways my experience with Black Gold is it's always been a positive, thriving kind of community. It's not something that you haven't come in to necessarily save or change. So I'm just curious about how you bring those like kind of experiences to your new role.
Well, I think one of the biggest things when you, especially when you change divisions, your education's education. There's nuances with every division. Every school division has a different culture. Provinces have different nuances, but it's the same issues, maybe different formulas, different acronyms, some different ways of doing things. So I think one of the things when you have a variety of experiences, first is to, when you start in a new place, is to really get to understand the division, the school trustees, who you're working for, your senior team, your central office staff, and your school communities. And you always come from the lens to look at what are the strengths and what are the different gifts that the different people bring, and where are people interested and passionate about the types of things where they want to go. Because it's about moving with people and not, like you said, coming in and having a mindset, hey, I've done this somewhere else, so I'm going to do this here. That just won't work. It's completely organic. It's building the relationships. It's developing pedagogical knowledge. And then how do you, I say refine and support growth, because it's always about improvement. No matter what we do in this world, in this work, there's always room for growth. There's always room to get better. And you want to have people moving with you. And I think that's an important part.
So I'm always curious about that, but because you referenced it, you're building trust, and you also talked about all of the different trustees and central office people, so all stakeholders. So what are some of the things that maybe you do intentionally, and you have done intentionally over the past 7 months, to try to earn and build that trust and social capital amongst your stakeholders?
I think first and foremost, you're visible. And when I first started, you spent a fair bit of time with the trustees and some of the division office staff. Prior to coming, had lots of one-on-one conversations with the leaders in the district. And then same with the school trustees. And you're listening to what's important, what they're proud about, what interests them, trying to get an understanding of how you work with people. And when it comes to a leader, like also being very open and vulnerable about your beliefs and what your focus is, where you would like to go or what drives you, what makes you interested, what are the experiences that have benefited you, and then listening. Like there's a ton of listening. So I know when I started 31 schools, I asked the board to be patient with me and give me time. And I spent at least 2 hours in every school in the first 12 weeks, walking through classrooms, talking to school leaders, asking them what they're proud about, what are they interested in, what's their focus, what things they would like to see in the future, and really collecting that. And to have to come from a non-judgmental lens. It's really listening and building knowledge and understanding the different contexts. Every division I've been in, one community, the next, one school, the next, there is a different context. So you can't assume that the context is the same because you've been in one school or you want to understand. There's nuances in every place. And so I think that's the part, really listening and making decisions based on that and working with your people, valuing the people who have the toughest role in the system, which is school administrators who are navigating so many different things, and how do you support them in their work and create an environment where you're not worried about making mistakes. You're worried about what's best for kids, what's best for staff.
In those early conversations, and you said you wanted to know what people are proud of and what their hopes and dreams are, like, what can you take from all of those 31 schools and that collective that sort of maybe tells a bit of a story that is not 31 individual ideas of what they're proud of and what they want, but the collective Black Gold story that sort of maybe came to you loud and clear as to what people are excited about and what their hopes are about teaching and learning.
Black goals of relationships, and it's relationships between students, staff and administration, school trustees and staff and community. And there were lots of common links walking through all the schools. Every single building I walked in, you could tell there was a lot of care and love for kids. There was an openness, there was a friendliness, there was a real keen interest in having great learning experiences. Proud of some of the innovations, like our dual credit, some of our CTS programs, and some of the opportunities for work experience really is top notch. And when you're brand new and you're superintendent and you're walking through classrooms and you feel welcome in pretty much every classroom, you know that there's a good culture and people, they don't know me. Of course, some people are going to be nervous when you come in, but you really felt that real welcomeness and openness. And I think some of the things like you get some of the common links that school leaders are interested in pursuing and what they're working on. And I know one of the areas they're focused on is visible learning. And you start to have those conversations and narrow. And then how do you start to think about how are we going to continue to build off what the school leaders, where they want to focus and where they want to go and empower them in that and not say, hey, we're going to do something completely different. And then start providing those opportunities to have conversations as peer to peer and collectively. And I think that's coming from always from a place of celebrating and appreciating what our staff are doing every day in schools.
Yeah. And what's interesting is you're sharing that, I'm listening and I'm hearing certain things like, yes, there's not a million miles difference between school divisions in Manitoba, Alberta, or really anywhere across Canada. There's way more commonalities than there are differences. However, I just heard you say you highlighted a couple things like this dual credit. You talked about visible learning as being specific not characteristics, but specific programs and
Uh-huh.
focuses have been made at some point a priority for Black Gold. So maybe can you add to that list at all around some other things that you say, yeah, our division is very focused and very excited about some specific things that may not be true with other divisions, but is for yours?
I'd say there's a real interest in collaboration and learning to, uh, I guess I would say to take on a more of an action research approach where they can learn from each other. I think we're in the beginning phases of that. And I think one of the common things, and though partially in my career, I've always been looking at what are the structures, what are the systems, what are the supports that is going to generate deep learning for people, helping people get to narrow goals where they're similar, where there's some commonality. So when they get together from different schools, they can really learn together. And so what I would say is that Black Gold's got a really unique culture with their school leaders. Very open, very reflective, and willing to do things. So I think that's the exciting part. And I know that when we're looking at how do we make things better for our teachers, how do we make things better for our students, it really starts with having a really specific, narrow focus. And I'm seeing that's what our school leaders want. And so I think that's unique. It's pretty hard when we're inundated with 8,000 different requests and different ideas and people want to do things. And when you focus on too many things, you end up not being good at any of them. And so I think that's unique. And I think that's something that we're really proud about here. I think the other thing is we're just in the process of building a collegiate school. So it's in the construction phase. And I think this goes back to in general, the mindset of principles and Black goals, just the innovation and the thought process about how we're going to staff it, how we're going to offer different programs with colleges and all the little pieces that go into it, and the natural sharing that happens from the individuals who are involved with their colleagues to solicit feedback, to solicit ideas, and how other students in the division can benefit from it. So I think those are interesting things. I think as an education system, uh, pretty much everyone across the country is focusing on literacy, numeracy, and equity. And so I think those are some of the common pieces that we see across.
Right. Yeah. And I think one thing that fascinates me, and I don't know if you have any thoughts on it, but I'll just share my wondering. When you mention you have a school leaders who have an appetite and an interest in collaboration and really working together. I don't think that is necessarily super unusual. What is though a little bit different is the fact that they are pursuing it as something that they've probably been able to do in the past. So in other words, the culture has been set so that people can actually do these things and they found that beneficial, which is the unique part about that in my experience has been that I've talked to school division leaders, and this is other school division leaders from within Alberta who have done some surveys and found out that their principals are actually the loneliest group of people. Like they crave this, right? Because of the nature of their job. Oftentimes they don't. But what I feel like what you're describing is this is something that they've been able to engage in at some points during their time, and they found that so valuable. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on maybe how that, why that is. Like, what is it that had been done previously to set them up to say, yeah, we want to keep this idea of action research going, where we collaborate and learn with and from each other. So I don't know if you have been able to observe anything from that.
I'll say that the previous leadership and some of the current people on the board have really emphasized relationships and opportunity for people to work together and to do things. Obviously, there's a strong culture of trust and feeling of support in the division, from principals to central office staff to school trustees. And I think that's a big part of it. When you have that, you're not having to create that.
Right.
Uh, that's not there. Your focus is to how do we create an environment that's trust. So I'm very fortunate to come to a division that, for the most part, naturally has that, has a system of trust. And they started some work in visible learning last fall, and it's a broad based approach. And there's lots of things you can do in there. And through some of the conversations and some of the things that we've done with the principals, we're starting to see common things that every school is focusing on. That actually helps bring a natural focus. So I think that's a big thing. So, and I always say this as a leader: what are the areas that most of your leaders, where they want to go? That's where your focus should be, and it has to be towards a direction that you want. But you find out where they're willing to go, and we're seeing our school leaders all wanting to focus on learning intention success criteria, which is a good starting point. And then there's so many springboards from that. And I think that's about when you have people where they want to go in the same place. Maybe there's some are not as strong as others, but you can build that culture where they learn from each other. They they can celebrate. They can say next steps. They can talk about what are they doing next with their staff? What are they planning? How do they celebrate with their staff? They can get feedback. How do you, and who do you bring in? Who do you bring in your schools to support you with that work? And I know the biggest thing, teachers are often by themselves, principals are by themselves, senior leaders are by themselves. The more we can solve problems together and improve together and to share that load, the better our wellness is, the less lonely people feel, the more willing people are willing to take risks and not give up when something doesn't work right away. I think one of the things I've seen in my career too often is that something doesn't work as well right off the bat, and people quickly jump onto something else instead of asking the questions: how do we dig into this? What would help it work? And I think you want to build that culture of continuous inquiry, because for the most part, things don't work as well right at the beginning. And then what are the little tweaks? What are the nuances? What do you need to do differently? And not being afraid of having to be right.
And difficult work, challenging work is such that it's not easy to do by yourself, and it's probably not meant to do by yourself. And so I think in a lot of cases, that's to your point, is that when it doesn't go well, and I've been the one that's doing it myself, is I don't want to keep, wheels here. But if you're doing this in collaboration, then when I'm feeling like it's not working for me, maybe you're there to pick me up and say, wait a minute, have we tried this? Might we explore a different path? And I think, again, this is the ongoing challenge of the culture of education that is just isolated by nature. And so I think the more we work to break down that barrier and create opportunities where, and at the end of the day, you mentioned that the idea of wellness, and I've long believed, and I've seen it specifically in my time, is that one of the biggest issues around wellness is people just feeling like it's too hard and I'm doing this by myself. And what am I supposed to do? And so often, like, nobody goes into education thinking this is easy. It's hard work. It's never going to be easy. That's never going to happen. And I think people are okay with that, as long as, can somebody help me along the way
Yeah.
here? And it's probably akin to being a single parent versus doing it together. You can do it, but as single parents who are amazing, when you see them do it, you go, I don't know how they do it, because as somebody that's had a life partner, we find it hard enough with the two of us doing it. How
Right.
it's got to be so difficult for single parents. And so again, I think the more people that can be involved in supporting, and I think the better. Yeah, no. So let me just, I don't know if it's shifting gears, but I think about your sort of overall experience as a leader, and this part of the show is to help people understand the challenges that are facing leaders and how different leaders have tackled those over the years. So I don't can think about it doesn't have to be within Black Gold, it could be any other your tenures. Can you just maybe tell us about a leadership challenge that really helped you in your growth? And maybe it's a story of success, maybe it was a failure, I don't know, but just a leadership challenge that kind of comes to mind that really has helped maybe shape you and the work that you do today.
I'd probably say the thing that shaped me the most, and maybe it wasn't a leadership challenge, maybe it was, is when I was actually a teacher and I taught in a northern isolated community and obviously on a reserve. It was the most empowering, enriching experience that I've ever had in my career. And I was so miserable at it for the first part. And I'll just say this. I think when you, as a individual, go through a place where you're not comfortable and you're maybe not as successful at first, and you realize it's about a relationships and opening your own view, your own viewpoints. I was raised in an environment where you volunteer, you work hard, you give back to your community, you do all those things. And everyone has a different perspective in their life. And I think not everyone has that same experience. And so I think one of the challenges in leadership and one of the biggest challenges is to have the humility to question your own personal biases, to question your own thought processes, and to open yourself up to other people's perspectives. And so what I would say is that I learned that curriculum wasn't the end in itself, it was a means to an end. And how do you create opportunities that are relevant to individuals that work with you? How do you, or students, and how do you do the same things that everyone wants? Everyone wants their kids to be successful. Everyone wants their kids to be decision makers, thinkers, critical thinking. So how do you put that in an authentic experience? So if I flip that to becoming a system leader, and let's say in an experience where there's not a lot of commonality between schools and there's a great care in all the schools, there's all these different things. There's schools using different assessments and different focus points, and there's different needs. The challenge becomes, how do you start to build that collaborative spirit with the people you're working with? And I think that's the real challenge, is in terms of giving people voices, giving people opportunities, and finding that and making sure that your system doesn't have excuses. And I think that's the biggest thing I learned from my time working in a Northern Reserve where English was a second language. Most amazing people I've ever had. Poverty was ridiculously third world living conditions, and kids are showing up every day to school. And I think one of the things that you also have to learn is that through your work, that people have the ability to do more than you ever thought was possible. So you have to start thinking about, how do you create things that, how do you help people see that things that they can do things that they never thought wasn't imaginable, especially with kids. And I think that kind of shaped me as an educator. And so I'll say this, I'll give an example more specific. When technology first came out, I don't know if you remember the iPods. We thought we wanted to try a one-to-one device pilot. And we gave six classrooms one-to-one iPods, and it failed miserably. It failed miserably. Staff spent all their time looking for apps and trying to find the apps to basically make digital worksheets. Didn't go well. They thought their screens were too small and that kids wouldn't like them because the screens were too small. And we tried that for a year. It didn't work. So the second year we made some tweaks and we said, stop looking for apps. We want to use it in a different direction. Still happened. Nothing changed. There was recommendations. And then BlackBerry was going through some difficulties, and BlackBerry playbooks are really cheap. There's not as many apps with BlackBerry. So we did the BlackBerry playbooks. We're going to use it as a video tool. We're going to use it for creativity. We're going to use it for that. And teachers still wanted to look for the magic app. And part of it was we changed our PD development plan and those things, but we never hit the mark with our staff. So eventually we went to a one-to-one device with tablets after failing for 4 years, failing miserably for 4 years. And we actually decided when we were putting it, these are the only apps you're going to be allowed. Kids are going to own them. They're going to be one-to-one. and it's all going to be creativity. And we're going to do PD sessions with you on those apps about how you could use them, very specific. And we gave them to classrooms where there was teachers who were really good with technology, teachers who were not good with technology, but were open to it, and teachers who were not good with technology and were not open to it. And we decided for that because we wanted to find out what supports we need to do if we are going to do this. And there was no longer the ability to put on apps. Teachers couldn't put on apps. Kids could put on their own apps, but teachers couldn't. It narrowed the focus where we started to have professional learning communities from those people and supports where they learn together. And eventually grew where it was in every middle school teacher's hands and very successful in terms of using it as a learning tool and developing experts. And what I would say is that when you're trying something, it doesn't always work and you have to reflect and to look at making changes. And I think when I go back, when I tell you about my teaching experience and about how it is about how do we develop critical thinkers, decision makers, and people who are going to be really reflective and building that. It's the same experiences that you learn as a teacher as you're moving up and moving up to the system. Failure is a good thing. Failure is not a good thing if you don't reflect and you don't sit there and look at how to make it work. And it became very successful. And when you start putting out devices into every grade 5 to 8 student's hand, and they get to take them home 12 months of the year, and after 4 years, they get to keep them, and you have almost no breakage. And the places where you have laptops and there's lots of breakage because they're shared and communal keyboards, pieces being picked off the keyboards and different things. It really says about the power of perseverance and learning from what works from people from a variety of different backgrounds. So it can't be a one size fits all. As a leader, you have to really be thinking about that reflection piece and what did we learn from this? Is it worth continuing or what do we have to do differently? Because I think those are the things that make you successful. Anything of real value is really hard. And so I think that's a real hard part.
Those are great examples. And I think that that idea of looking at something that takes, as you said, 4 years, but you don't quite abandon it. It's not, I guess technology doesn't work. I guess that's not the approach. It's wait, we know there's something here. We just haven't figured out what it was and we'll learn as we go. And I think along the way, just as you said, the giving people the idea that like, okay, didn't go well, but what did we learn from that? What can we do differently? And I always think too, in part of that journey, you're bringing along students and everybody that feels like they're part of how can we help make this different? So it's not all placed on if you're a teacher and you didn't have success, that's on you. It's no, we're trying to figure back. And this is back to the conversation we had before around this
Right.
sort of collective, right? That like we can do this together. It's not left on the shoulders of a teacher to figure this out. If it didn't work, what can we do together? How can the students help us figure this out? How can we get more support for this? How can more teachers collaborate? So there's lots of ways to look at it. And I think that's, then you don't mind going through this together when it's this shared experience of we're trying to figure this out. And then we don't point fingers, say, it's their fault, it's our fault, it's their fault. That's not really a very useful conversation for the most part. It's more like, how might we keep moving forward? So
Mhm.
it sounds like you were able to create that kind of environment for people.
I think that's the most important thing. It's the same thing when you have assessment data. If the assessment data is not good and you make comments about that, you're doing a judgment and you're making people fearful of things. And ideally, what you want is you want people to ask questions and say, hey, what are the areas of challenge in here and what do we need to do to improve it? And I'll say that one time we had a divisional math assessment that teachers were doing for a number of years that they collected together and we had them centrally mark. And I came in and just seen how they were doing and they said that you're going to be upset. And I said, why is that? Our results are going to be really low. And I said, okay, so what can you tell me about that? We have more kids who are taking the higher level math than we've ever had. We've had too many challenging questions in our exams and all high complex. And I said, so what are we gonna learn from it? We need to make some tweaks to our assessment. We need to do those things. And I said, if our results go down because we have more kids taking higher math, that's a celebration. You can alleviate concerns by saying, be real, look at it. What are we learning from it? And what are we going to do? Because as soon as there's a fear that if we don't have this or we don't get to this, then you're going to have people who aren't going to say what they're really thinking. And I think as part of a leader, and I know that we've talked about this before, is really creating the conditions where people can be vulnerable, feel supported, and talk freely because it is hard work. And the big picture is we want to move together. And I think that's the real challenge is to create the conditions where people are willing to take some risks. And sometimes when we make comments about something, we're wrong, but it takes those first comments to generate other comments, which helps us get to the questions we should be asking. So we want to open up the door.
This episode is brought to you by Advanced Learning Partnerships, also known as ALP. We are a professional learning consulting group that serves communities across North America. We are partners, designers, and agents for change. You can learn more about the work we do at alplearn.com. And now back to the show. Well, and the other thing you mentioned too that I think is really critical is you came in and helped them see from a different perspective. Because so often teachers get in their own heads, right? Like they see something and they're just like, and that's not just teachers. We all do that, right? Like when we're seeing a problem, like we've been hammering at this thing and we're going like, I think here's what I have to do differently. I've tried, that's not working. And sometimes it does take somebody to come in from the outside to say, well, wait a minute. You actually should be celebrating this. Like the fact that you have more kids taking this higher level math, isn't that kind of a win? And yet sometimes you don't see that because you're saying they didn't do very well, but that's great. We'll get to there. But like before, you didn't have these kids taking these courses before. So yes, it's going to be more difficult. So I think that's another part of it is how do you invite people in that maybe don't have the same skin in the game in that they're doing it day to day, but can help you see things that you might have missed. And so this is where this is so important that these are multi-level where you have different voices that are coming into the scene that are providing perspectives that sometimes when you're right in the middle of it, you just don't see. So I think that's another awesome, way to lead.
Especially when you're like a system leader. When you're a principal, you have those same challenges, but you see your staff and you can understand when you need to spend more time with some people because maybe they're having some challenges or some difficulties. When you're a system leader, you don't see that staff very much. So when you say something or when you ask questions, it matters more. So that teacher I talked to, I might not have seen again for 3 months. And those are the things you have to be thinking about because you want to create that really reflective culture that's really going to generate good questions, good inquiry questions, and good potential solutions and learning together.
That's right. So you've shared lots of little pieces of your leadership journey here, but if you were to give advice, you're looking in your school division, you probably see some really excellent potential leaders. And again, as teachers, in many ways, they already are leaders. That's not maybe, but in terms of like really thinking about taking a more active role, whether that's a school leader or a district leader, whatever that is, what advice might you give one of those young teachers who is thinking about this, saying maybe that's something I should do as I continue forward? What advice would you give to them as they think about pursuing leadership?
I would say first and foremost to master classroom practice. I think that's probably number one. And to do that, you need to be reflective. You need to learn from others and you have to have an open stance. And I think to continue to build your philosophy of education and don't be stuck in it. Understand your biases and understand and be open to question them and talk to people of different viewpoints than you. I would say the other thing to do is great if you want to work in a number of different schools, because every school is different. You had a different context, different piece. Be a good follower. So join learning communities, learn from it. Don't get fixed on having to be right. Don't worry about what people think of you. Ask the right questions, reflect. And how do you measure your own impact with kids? And it should be about how you change things and having a no excuse mentality. So I know one of the things I've always said to people is I don't want to hear about socioeconomic status or whether they're in care or whether they have learning challenges or whether they're not eating. Those are things that we work on the side, but we have to help young people to become critical thinkers and decision makers and to open up opportunities they never thought were possible. Even more important, The other thing is to read and journal. So reflect on your practices, what's working, what's not. Don't give up on things, be persistent, and find good mentors. Who are people in the school system who you work with who have more knowledge in certain areas than you, and how can you learn from them? And how can you give back to them as well? And people who are you want to surround yourself with optimistic people and people who are really reflective. So our time, we only have so much time. So our time should be focused on the good parts. Can be challenges in there, but looking at it from an optimistic lens and just being persistent. Then long term, if you want to, then it's like taking some next steps. Are you able to lead some learning communities, PLCs? Are you able to become a resource teacher, a learning support teacher, or some other opportunities that are there? Are there divisional committees you're on? And what's your professional learning needs to help you do that? And that would be a big part of it.
Excellent. Yeah, lots of good stuff there. All right, this is a hard question, Mike, that I ask everybody. And I would like you to think about one person today, one person that you're grateful for in education. And ideally, this would be somebody who might actually listen to this and hear their name get a shout out. So again, I know people don't like this when they say, "Oh, I can't. There's so many. I'm just worried I left someone out." Yeah, I get it. But you got to
There's
get
lots.
I know there's lots, of
There's
course,
tons.
but you got
But
today it's one.
I'm going to say one, but I'm just going to say some of the most influential people in my career have been custodians, educational assistants, liaisons, teachers, and trustees, not just principals or teachers. So there's been lots. But a lady who is well known in Ontario named Bev Friedman, she's a fantastic mentor. She was a high school teacher, principal, special ed teacher, superintendent, worked in the ministry as a professor, did a lot of training on learning walks. I got to meet her in 2001 and at a learning walk and talk session in Manitoba. I brought her out a couple times when I was on a principal's learning committee. And then I brought her out as a superintendent in 3 different divisions now. And I'll say this, what makes her an amazing mentor is she knows more about pedagogy and practice and equity and has such a vast experience, worked all over the world, but she shares information. And I've known her for 23 years and we've become good friends and good colleagues, always connecting you to other people who are knowledgeable in certain areas that you can learn from and sending people to you to connect with you when she's identified people who have those things. When she comes and works, she always comes from the perspective of equity and learning and growth in people, always non-judgmental. And she's a person who also pushes you. Every time we meet or talk or we get together, she's pushing my thinking, not just agreeing and saying, "Hey, good job, Mike," or "You're doing this." She really pushes your thinking and asks hard questions and then asks you about how that really will work in the system or how will that work for your people. And then offer some different things to think about and point you in different resources and talk you through how to get things. And I'd say she's a great connector of people and does it because she wants good education for kids, doesn't do it for self. And so you can't ask for a better mentor or person to work with. And she does that for so many people. She's amazing.
That's a pretty glowing review. I could sense you're almost getting emotional when you're talking about her. Like, really, this is somebody who's meant a lot to you. And that's fantastic, Mike. Such a good one. All right. Listen, we like to finish on some little bit more fun, if you will,
Yeah.
less intense, if you will, kind of
Yeah.
conversations. What are you professionally, probably? What are you reading or listening to today that's keeping piquing your interests?
I just finished reading Hidden Potential by Adam Grant.
Right.
Science of Achieving Greater Things. Now, it's probably not one I would have normally picked up, and I've read a number of books. A great book. I sometimes people know I'm a reader. I was given this book, and then I was asked, "Have I read it yet? Have I read it yet?" I've read. I recently read Valley of the Birdtail, which is a fantastic book about truth and reconciliation. If you've ever read 21 Things You Didn't Know About the Indian Act, this book actually gives it life by almost personal stories. So I think I try to read a variety of things and from literacy to technology to professional learning to diversity. White Fragility was another book that I've recently read that's fantastic as well. And I think those are the things like as a leader, you have to expand your mindset. and really be thinking about, we all have holes and you want to surround yourself. So I say, if it's like a slice of Swiss cheese and you get other people to work with you that have a different slice of Swiss cheese, so the holes cover each other,
Yeah.
and really to learn different perspectives and open your mind and to constantly think of those things. And I journal about what I read. If I like the book, I do a
Nice.
lot of journaling.
Excellent. Yeah, I always like the phrase, and then somebody shared it with me, is the best thing you can do for your kids is to be an interesting person, which
Yeah.
means being well read and having, reading a variety of things, right? So it sounds like you're
Yep.
working towards that end. What about when you're not trying to improve yourself, when you're just chilling? I know it's just about time for the NHL season to start, so I know that'll occupy a lot of your free time is watching your Oilers. But beyond that, do you have any other kind of guilty pleasures or things you enjoy just to watch when you're trying to decompress after a long week?
I try to watch some, I watch occasional shows. So I'm currently watching The Old Man on Disney. It's actually quite an interesting show. I put it on once, and often I try to go on my treadmill. So when I'm on my treadmill, I usually put the iPad up and watch, and sometimes find some pretty cool shows. Also, the show Fada. I don't know if you've ever seen Fada on Netflix.
Nope.
It's an Israeli production. It's an excellent show. It's one that should watch. It tells story from two different perspectives, from Israeli soldiers going into the neighboring Lebanon and different things. And then you also get the other perspective. Still a little biased, but it has a little bit of perspective where you get a little more understanding on both sides. Really interesting show. So I enjoy sometimes some of those shows with a little bit of story and a little bit of action. So some of that.
All right, last question. Because part of what I do is I trying to give people both a perspective of Canadian leaders in different provinces, but also the geographies from somebody who's coming to visit. And you can focus on Black Gold specifically, south of Edmonton, or others. But if someone was to come and wanted to find a lesser known spot, maybe it's a restaurant, maybe it's a park, maybe it's, I don't know, some place that you think people should check out as this is a neat little place. What do you put in your hidden gems of places to check out in the area?
Well, Kalmar Bakery is is one of the best bakeries, period. There's another one good I found in Barhead. Barhead Bakery is fantastic too. And phenomenal donuts and pastries. You'll never buy a Tim Hortons donut again if you go there.
Okay.
As far as neat little gems, the Voyageur Park, it's in the River Valley in Devon, alongside a really nice golf course, and also along there, a river walk. So if you like to hike and walk, it's a nice little walk there. The Padoka Golf Course is maybe not as well known, but it's a stunning little golf course about 35 minutes south of Leduc. It's
So
a
you're not talking about Wolf Creek, are you?
no, Wolf Creek's a nice golf course too,
Oh,
but Padoka's
this is
one
not
where, yeah,
okay.
Padoka, there's a golf course, Padoka Golf Course.
Like the city
Uh,
course.
it's a city course of
Okay.
Padoka. It
Okay.
is a very nice course, and I probably never ever would have went there because it's not on the list when you look at it. It's worth golfing.
Great.
So that would,
Okay. That's a good tip for me. I really like that tip. So that's a great one. So I'm gonna have to check that one out.
Niagara
Listen, Mike,
Park is really good too, which is by
where's that? Sorry?
Genesee Park.
Genesee Park.
So
Okay.
it's got stocked fishing and nice walking trails, river crossing, all those kinds of things. Lots of wildlife. Good place for picnic or fishing. It's got a stocked lake, so that's a good place too.
Listen, bakeries, parks, and golf courses. That sounds like a great day right there.
Yeah.
Listen, Mike, I appreciate your time. This was great getting to know you more and your thoughts on leadership. So much good stuff here. I know people are going to really find value in. So I appreciate the time that you spent with me, and all the best in the new year.
Yeah. Thanks.